Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we are back with another episode of our Top 10 series in which I list cards from a particular set or theme according to a few different metrics. The metrics vary from time to time, but usually I take into consideration the power level of the card, how fun it is, and how unique it is. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to please click subscribe if you enjoy these videos. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me, and we're currently growing the channel and it helps me a lot. Much appreciated. And in today's video, we're going to be listing the top 10 cards for Commander from Phyrexia All Will Be One. For this list, we have taken into consideration cards from the main set and from the supplemental Commander sets. And kicking things off, we have our first honorable mention, which is Zopandrel Hungered Dominus. So 5 colorless and 2 green. It's a legendary creature, Phyrexian horror with reach, a 4/6, and at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. And then for 2 Phyrexian green, you can sacrifice 2 of the creatures and put an indestructible counter on Zopandrel Hungered Dominus. So all the Dominus have very powerful effects, and this one is no different. It is Unnatural Growth on a stick. Now, Unnatural Growth is obviously an amazing ability, but the fact that this costs 7 is why it's a little bit lower than it should be. However, this has a very easy way to give itself indestructible by sacrificing 2 creatures and paying 4 life. You can even do it when you're completely tapped out, so it's very easy to just play this, immediately sacrifice 2 creatures, and then permanently be doubling your team's size every single combat, which makes this a very, very strong Dominus, and even though it's 7 mana, that isn't that difficult to hit with green. For our next honorable mention, we have Koth, Fire of Resistance. For 2 colors and 2 red, it is a legendary Planeswalker Koth that starts with 4 loyalty. It has +2 to search for a basic mountain card, reveal it and put it into your hand. It has -3 to deal damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control, and the -7 is an emblem that says whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 4 damage to any target. Now, I've talked about this card before and why I'm quite high on it. I did a video explaining why I think it's quite good, but I still think people are undervaluing it a little bit. It's obviously not in the top 10. It's not one of the very best cards of the set, but it's a really good card for most mono red decks, and I think pretty much every mono red deck should be interested in this in Commander. It's a nice way to get card advantage in mono red, which isn't really that common. And it also comes with reusable removal, and if you ever get the ultimate off, well, that's just gravy on top. So I think it's a pretty good card. For our next honorable mention, we have another Planeswalker, which is Nissa, Ascended Animist. For 3 colors, 2 green and 2 Phyrexian green. She's a Planeswalker with 7 starting loyalty, and she has completed, which means she comes in with fewer loyalty if you pay life for her cost. And then the +1 ability says create an XX green Phyrexian horror creature token, where X is Nissa, Ascended Animist's loyalty. The -1 is destroy target artifact or enchantment, and the -7 is until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 for each forest you control and gain trample. So obviously this is only going to go in any mono green deck, but in those decks it's going to be very solid since all 3 options are really great. You can use it as an overrun if you draw it late and need that, and giving your team +7/+7 or close enough and trample is no joke. Or you can just pump out really big tokens turn after turn, 5/5, 6/6, 7/7s, or you can repeatedly destroy artifacts and enchantments, and there's a lot of those running around in Commander games. So pretty much all of these effects are very solid. And outside of mono green, it's not quite as good because the ultimate falls off a bit, but the other 2 abilities are still good enough that it might see play outside of mono green decks. And now we're entering the top 10 proper. We're starting off with Staff of Completion. It's a colorless artifact for 3, which has tap, pay 1 life, destroy target permanent you own, tap, pay 2 life, add 1 mana of any color, tap, pay 3 life, proliferate, tap, pay 4 life, draw a card, and then 5 colorless, untap Staff of Completion. So this is obviously a callback to Staff of Domination, which is a really good card in Commander, particularly in decks which can make a lot of mana or which have ways to make infinite mana. This is going to be weaker in those kind of decks because it has the life payments built in to make it a little bit more painful. For the most part, I would say it's a little bit weaker than Staff of Domination, but the advantage it has over it is that it needs a lot less mana investment. Basically, you can use the ability as long as you have life to pay. And this can go in basically every deck because it's a mana rock. Even if you're having to pay 2 life for it, the fact that you have a mana rock that can also draw you a card or proliferate is really solid. However, it's going to excel in decks that have a lot of ways to gain life. So in any life gain deck or in any deck with a commander that has lifelink, this is going to be really good. Seeing as you're basically negating one of the downsides, and this just becomes tap to draw a card every turn or tap to proliferate, which is actually a great ability to have repeatable for no mana. So those are the other decks that are going to be interested in this proliferate decks because having access to a repeatable proliferate effect is really, really good. Moving on, we have number 9, which is Vraska Betrayal's Sting. For 4 colorless, 1 black, and 1 Phyrexian black, she's a planeswalker that comes in with 6 loyalty and has completed, which of course means she'll come in with 2 fewer loyalty if you pay life for her. And then for 0, she has you draw a card and you lose 1 life, proliferate. For -2, she turns a creature into a treasure. And for -9, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. So all of these effects are really, really solid. Obviously, she doesn't really have a 0 ability. It's a +1 ability because of the proliferate in there. And that's why I think this card is much better than it might initially seem. Having one of the strongest forms of removal for creatures on this that gets around death triggers and gets around basically anything except artifact blink is really good. And then being able to proliferate all of the counters in your deck or all of your planeswalkers is really amazing. It's obviously fantastic as well with something like Doubling Season, although most planeswalkers are, because you can just immediately give your opponent 9 poison counters and then all you need is just 1 way to proliferate and you instantly win the game. I think she's pretty solid. The 0 ability and the -2 ability are really, really fantastic abilities, and having them both on the same card is very flexible. At number 8, we have Bloated Contaminator. For 2 colorless and 1 green, it's a 4/4 creature Phyrexian beast with trample, toxic 1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. So as I mentioned in my video previewing this card, I think this is really, really strong. Obviously, it's very pushed, and it's going to be probably the best way for poison decks and toxic decks to kind of get through and get the ball rolling. But I think this fits in any deck that's interested in proliferating, and that's actually a lot of decks in Commander at the moment. There's a lot of decks that care about +1/+1 counters. There's a lot of Super Friends decks that are totally interested in this effect because it has a decent body for blocking as well. And there's just a bunch of decks where this pulls a lot of work. All of the angles it's hitting are really useful. Getting in for 2 toxic effectively every turn is really good. Having trample is great. And just being able to have repeatable proliferate for 3 mana is an absolute sweet deal. At number 7, we have Conduit of Worlds. For 2 colorless, green, it's an artifact that says you may play lands from your graveyard. And then you can tap it and choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. This is fantastic for a few different reasons. So first, Crucible of Worlds is a great card, and it's very expensive, but it does cost 1 mana less than this, and it's colorless, so it can go in more decks. With that being said, Crucible of Worlds effect is an effect that you want in green decks anyway, for the most part, so it's not a big deal that this costs green mana. It costs 1 more, but you're getting quite a lot of upside here, because late game, if for whatever reason you run out of gas, or you just have a really good play from your graveyard, but not from your hand, you just get to play that. There's no cost, you don't have to exile it when it dies, there's no downside really other than you can't play anything else this turn. You can even get around that with instants or cards that you can activate or play during your opponent's turn, so the downside is very minimal for basically guaranteeing that you're going to have gas until the end of the game. And barring exile effects, your opponent can't deal with your best cards when this is out. So if they kill your best card and it's a permanent, you just play it again. And then they're going to have to kill it again, but then you can just choose to play it again from your graveyard indefinitely. So it just creates a very, very strong situation in the late game. At number 6, we have all the Sun's Twilights. I'm not going to be reading them individually because, of course, there are 5 of them and they're pretty wordy, but they all have a similar effect in that if X is 5 or more, they kind of give you a benefit as they're taking it away from your opponent. So they kind of mirror the Praetors a little bit in that sense, and boy are these all strong. The black one's going to let you reanimate something of yours and kill something of theirs. The green one's the only one that's not mirroring, but it's actually going to let you get 2 cards for 1. Anyway, it's going to let you put a land into play and a creature from the top X of your library. That's great. The red one's going to destroy X artifacts, and then you're going to get copies of those until end of turn, which can be really brutal. The blue one is going to gain control of a creature and then give you an additional copy of that, so that's obviously also great. And then the white one is a board wipe that's going to leave 5 toxic mites behind on your side. So they're all incredibly strong, and for some of them we haven't really seen cards that do stuff like this before, such as Red Sun's Twilight, which is a really kind of unique effect that we haven't really had in the past. I'm excited to see how all of these play out, and I foresee them being played in a lot of different decks. At number 5, we have the Eternal Wanderer. For 2 colorless and 2 white, she's a legendary planeswalker with 5 starting loyalty and a static that says no more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. And then +1, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner control at the beginning of that player's next end step. For 0, it has create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike. And for -4, for each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. So I've mentioned this one again in one of my preview videos. I think it's amazing that you can have a board wipe where you choose your best creature and they have to keep their worst, and then they can only attack this with one creature anyway, so it's going to be very easy to protect it. And then the other two modes are pretty solid as well. Obviously, it's not why you're playing it, but being able to have a 2/2 double striker every turn isn't that bad. And then obviously being able to blink stuff is really good. If you need to, you can also blink the opponent's stuff to make sure they can only attack the bad creature if you want to keep this alive for some time. It's just a very flexible card, and being basically a built-in board wipe that then sticks around and gains you value, I think it's going to be very solid. At number 4, we have Clever Concealment for 2 colorless and 2 white. It's an instant with Convoke, which means that you can tap your creatures to pay for 1 colorless or 1 mana of their color, and then it says any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. Now this is the only card from the Commander product that I've included in this list, but boy is it a strong one. It's even possible that this should be higher up on the list because this is just a fantastic board wipe protection effect. It can target any of your permanents, so not only creatures, and it can do it for free. Up until now, the only card that could do this for free is Flawless Maneuver, and that could only affect your creatures. This can actually affect anything that you control, and you don't need to have your commander. So obviously that's a very, very strong effect. It's not the same as Teferi's Protection in that it doesn't phase you out, and it still allows you to be attacked, although I will say, if there's a board wipe being cast, there's probably not going to be much left on the board to attack you until your next turn, so it's not as risky as it initially sounds. This just seems very, very strong, and it's going to lead to some intense blowouts when people think they've got you because you're tapped out, and then suddenly you get to protect all of your stuff. Very, very solid card. And grading into the top 3, we have Drivnod Carnage Dominus for 3 colors and 2 black. Legendary creature, Phyrexian Horror. It's an 8/3. And if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And then it has, for 2 Phyrexian black, and exile 3 creatures from your graveyard, put an indestructible counter on Drivnod Carnage Dominus. So I'm surprised this hasn't been receiving more attention because I think this is one of the best cards in the set. This is basically a Taste of Karlov effect that can go in any black deck, not only Orzhov decks. So this effect can fit into Rakdos, it can fit into Dimir, it can fit into Golgari, and I think Rakdos and Golgari are both very, very interested in having this effect, but previously they couldn't because of Taste of Karlov. Now you totally can, and this also can become indestructible, so it can be very difficult for certain decks to deal with. And if you've ever played against anybody running Taste of Karlov in their deck, you know that that's always one of the best cards in the deck. Doubling death triggers in any aristocrat deck is going to be absolutely brutal, and this being so easy to make indestructible by essentially costing 0 to do so and being able to do it immediately is a big deal. I think this is very good, and the fact that it's mono black is extremely relevant. At number 2, we have the Mycosynth Gardens. It's a land sphere. It comes in untapped, and it says tap to add colorless, 1 colorless, and tap add 1 mana of any color, and for X colorless and tap, the Mycosynth Gardens becomes a copy of target non-creature artifact you control with mana value X. So at first glance, a lot of people might not see this as being that interesting, but it doesn't take long for you to realize how absolutely brutal this is. Obviously, once you copy something, it loses the original ability and it becomes that thing forever. It's permanent, you can't use it to land anymore, but that's not going to be that big a deal because one of the best things you can do with this is copying something like Soul Ring, and immediately this becomes an ancient tomb that doesn't cost you life. That's amazing, but there's all these other things you could do with this. You could get a second copy of Skullclamp, or late game you could get another Wormcoil engine if you're really low on life and you need to stay alive. You can just get a copy of whatever the best artifact you have on the board is at that moment in the late game, and it's always going to be amazing. It even has applications outside of Commander. It's going to be pretty good probably in Amulet of Vigor decks in Modern. So this just seems like a really, really strong card in multiple formats, but I think in Commander in particular it has so many applications and it's so easy to take advantage of this. Even getting something like Contagion Engine, an extra copy of that, and if you're in a Proliferate deck, can just be really, really incredible. I think this is a really great card, and crucially, the opportunity cost of playing it is incredibly low because it doesn't even come in tapped. It doesn't cost you anything except a colorless land slot, which lots of decks have in abundance. And finally, at number 1, and probably to nobody's surprise, it is Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, for 4 colors and 1 white. She's a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, a 4/7 with Vigilance. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. So there's not much to be said about this card. This is the most hyped card of the set. It's the most valuable. It's the one everybody's looking to open and to put into their decks. I have it on the top of this list and not on the top of my best commanders list because I think it's actually better in the 99 rather than as a commander, seeing as if it's a commander, everybody can see it coming and have removal prepared for it. And also it's harder to get a strong mono white deck as opposed to having this this in any other color and come out of nowhere and suddenly hose your opponents whilst doubling your own stuff. I think this is a bit too pushed. I've thought so from the beginning, but my issue with it isn't really the abilities. I think the abilities are fine. I just think the stat line is a bit much because 4/7 Vigilance is incredibly obnoxious to play against, and having it come down on turn 5 is just really annoying. You can't really attack into it with a lot of stuff, and it can still keep attacking for 3 itself. It's going to make it very difficult to attack the player that has this out, and I just wish they'd been a little bit less aggressive with the stat line on this because I think it's a bit silly. So there you have it. That has been our top 10 for today. What are your thoughts on this top 10? Are there any cards that you would have in a different place? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care. Woo!